India has more voters than any other country. It is the world's largest democracy. But in a multicultural society, minorities are under attack. How can that be changed with the ruling Hindu Nationalist Party accused of encouraging this hostility, and it's set for another term in office? Welcome to Roundtable. Well, since Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, his critics say his BJP party's overseen a climate of rising Hindu jingoism, increasing communal violence, setting neighbour against neighbour.
Since Narendra Modi swept to power in 2014, there has been a resurgence in right-wing Hindu nationalism. His party has denied stoking violence, but it has been on the rise. Communal violence went up by 28% between 2014 and 2017, according to government reports. Minorities fear that things will get worse with another BJP election win. According to a study by the minority rights group, there were 700 outbreaks of communal violence, with 86 people killed and more than 2,000 injured in 2016 alone. The real figures are likely to be much higher though, as many incidents go unreported. And the BJP is accused of using hate speech to win support, with high-profile candidates barred from the election campaign for targeting Muslims. Is India's ruling party a threat to minorities? And is the country in danger of sliding further towards authoritarianism?
Joining us from New Delhi, we have Gaurang Kanth, a lawyer for the Supreme Court of India, who has represented the government. In Oxford, Nikita Sood, an expert in developing countries. With me in the studio, Meenakshi Ganguly from Human Rights Watch, just back from India, and Amar, Sohal, a historian of modern India. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. Gaurang, let me ask you first of all, Amnesty India says there is a culture of impunity in the country. I know you disagree with all of this, so what is your version of events?
Well, I think the very fact that we are saying that there is some kind of a jingoism which is working and some kind of a minority threat which exists in India right now under the leadership of the Bharatiya Janata Party, I sort of really disagree, because if I can really show figures and I can show the schemes which the present government has actually brought into the system, and the kind of money which has gone into the minority institutions, or for schemes to develop the minorities, or to promote them, or for their housing, or for anything of that sort, is something which has not been done in the past. So to attribute this kind of an allegation that the minorities are under threat and there is some sort of a jingoism which exists in the Modi's government would not be right, to that extent that we have not really seen anything apart from what the press is actually bringing it out and what people have been saying. So
you will have an opportunity. You'll have an opportunity to lay out some of the plans that you think have helped a little bit later in the programme. But I'm just going to say, New Delhi TV says there's been a 500% increase in the use of divisive language by elected leaders, 90% of them from the BJP in the last 5 years. Fact Checker India, a data journalism outfit, said 2018 saw the most hate crimes motivated by religious bias in India in a decade. Are you saying these are made up by the media?
Well, most of it, the media, unfortunately, in India has contributed a lot to this entire controversy. And I think the data which you're talking about, the facts which have come into, your possession, is something which I really dispute to that extent, because, as a practicing lawyer and somebody who's really seeing things, I don't really see these kind of cases coming into court, or people really filing cases. There might be some sporadic incidents which would have taken place, but then to give this kind of a number, this kind of a figure, people there's a freedom of liberty and speech and expression, so people do express themselves, but I don't really attribute that to be communal in nature. And I think, we would have seen that the Prime Minister of this country has actually reprimanded everybody. Recently only there was an incident of, one of the BJP leaders, Sadhvi Pragya, who had actually made a statement which was sort of a pro-Hindu statement, or condemning, Mahatma Gandhi and all that, which was thoroughly reprimanded by the Prime Minister. I think he had expressed his displeasure. And whenever there has been incidents like this, which has taken place in India, we have always seen the leader coming out and actually reprimanding people and actually making a statement
Okay.
which is pro.
I'm going to get reaction to what you've said. We will be back with you very soon, Gaurang. And actually, just back from India, you spent a lot of your time out there. Is he right on two counts, that this is an exaggeration? And secondly, the fact that cases aren't going to court means they aren't happening, these incidents.
Well, I mean, he's Gaurav, you're a Supreme Court lawyer, so you should know that the Supreme Court has issued directives on mob violence because there have been such serious cases in recent times. 44 cases that we documented, 36 of them that were killed were Muslim. Well, I think what has happened in the past 5 years of the Modi administration has been an environment, an enabling environment that has allowed hate to prosper. And to a large part, it's because if the Prime Minister or any other political leader has spoken, they've spoken too little and too late. So therefore, people have been, as they call, lynched. There's been mob violence on the streets. But more than that, there is a sensibility of bigotry and violence, which unfortunately comes from people who believe that they are not going to be prosecuted. That is the thing. I mean, people commit crimes because they think they're going to be protected.
Well, I suppose you say people don't think they're going to be prosecuted, but at the same time you say there's been an increase of cases coming to the Supreme Court.
Well,
so,
David, I mean, here is my problem. My problem, and it's actually... It's actually got. I mean, you know this. It became quite a big deal, right? 11 men are convicted by a lower court. They get bail, and a BJP MP garlands them. That kind of messaging is wrong because it conveys a message of political patronage to
Ms. Ganguly, it's so unfortunate that, to say that the BJP MP was garlanding him, and we should see the credential of that BJP MP who has actually been out there in the United States and has come back to India to serve the nation. He's one of the most brightest politicians we have in the country, and it's so unfortunate that the person had absolutely no idea. And you know what? You might be shaking hands with people who might be involved in cases, and you will have no idea that what this person has done 2 days back. Or
okay, so you're suggesting this is not a good example to hold up. But I'm going to have to bring in the other guests on the programme, Gaurang. I'm going to have to bring in. There are 4 of you here. I will come back to you, I do promise. Nikita, you've got your hand very politely up in the air, and we've never had anybody that courteous on Roundtable, so over to you.
Thank you. I want to continue with this case of patronage and impunity. And Meenakshi raised the point about an MP representing a constituency in Jharkhand in Central East India. And he, of course, like the previous speaker said, is very qualified. He's, Ivy League educated, etc. But the fact of the matter is that these 11 men were convicted for lynching. And not only did he garland them, and we can say, maybe he didn't know who these constituents were and, they just came to his door and he garlanded them. But there is evidence that he has spoken publicly in their favor and also raised money for their appeal. So, this is not ignorance. This is very much patronage, and it has been documented in the press.
I was going to ask you about the general picture, but you've been very specific, Nikita. Again, you'll have another chance in just a moment, but we must bring in Amar here to contextualise all of this. You specialise in Indian history, let's say from the beginning of the 20th century to now. Nationalism is not new, but are we seeing a different type of nationalism now, and has it changed dramatically in the last few years?
Yes and no, David. We're seeing one variety of Indian nationalism on show today, which wasn't the founding ideology of the state. When India became independent in 1947, despite partition, the republic emerged as a secular democracy with equal rights.
And it's constitutionally mandated.
Absolutely, absolutely. And figures like Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, B.R. Ambedkar, Maulana Azad, these leaders, they tried to enshrine an idea of equal rights in the constitution. Now, there was an alternative second idea of the nation, which was that basically only Hindus, or Hindus are better Indians than everyone else, especially those,
First among equals.
of course, but perhaps even more than that, because those whose holy lands are beyond the territorial boundaries of India, i.e. Muslims and Christians, are often thought to be either fifth columnists who are to be eventually eradicated, or at best, due minority protection.
So where has this idea crept in? If you say it was a secular constitution, all races and creeds supposedly treated exactly the same way, where and when did this come in?
Well, this tug of war has always been there for the last maybe 90 years or so. But it was only in the 80s and 90s that Hindu nationalism really asserted itself electorally and managed to gain support in vast swathes of North India. And in the 90s and early 2000s, they were led by a man called Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the leader of the BJP, who was seen to be a slightly softer version of this Hindu nationalism. Narendra Modi perhaps represents something a little bit further towards the right. And his politics, initially, interestingly, in 2014, was hidden behind, you wanted to interject?
No, I want to say, I mean, okay, so we had Mr. Vajpayee. You've now got Narendra Modi, as you say, stepping up in terms of their jingoistic views, if you like that. But why did they gain traction?
Well, I think you could argue, that's a big question, but you could argue that they played on dormant, prejudiced feelings among the majority, which catapulted them to power. You could argue that, especially if they come to power again, because in 2014, Modi was able to hide behind the mask of so-called vikas or development.
And he's not afraid to.
And he's not today. Now he's talking about, he's equating Indian Muslims with Pakistan sometimes. And
Nikita's doing it again. I'm gonna have to say, keep your hand where it is, and we're gonna go to Gaurang for just a moment. BJP's slogan, "One nation, one culture." That doesn't sound inclusive to me.
Well, I think, what he's been pointing it out, I think it's very apparent and very clear that the divide, it's not about a divide also, different religions do coexist in India, and they coexist very well. So to today say that the minorities are under any kind of threat, and the figures and the examples which are being given by the other panelists over here, doesn't really sound to be very convincing.
But let's go back to what I said
which have been filed.
Let me go back to what I said at the beginning. One nation, one culture. Your party's slogan, is that one culture only your culture?
Not at all. I think it has been spoken time and again by the Prime Minister of this country that we need to keep and take every single religious, regional, and other people together. These are the speed breakers which we don't remove. It cannot be a politics of, collusive politics, a politics where you need to take everybody together, and then only there can be any development in this country. If you don't include people, you have a separatist thought process, then development really can't take place. I think this has been the agenda of the Bharatiya Janata Party. They have been time and again saying this. Yes, incidents have taken place, but we really can't blame the political parties. Incidents have been there in the past too. Writings have been done in the past too. But we really don't have that kind of figures in this present government.
All right, okay. Well, an awful lot of people would dispute that. They say the figures are there. Meenakshi, I know you wanted to say something. Carry on, and then I've got a question for you.
Well, I was actually going to say that, India is and has been celebrated as a democracy. And political parties have ideologies. They're free to promote whichever ideology they want to do. My concern, and as a rights activist, that is where we sit, right? Is there rule of law? Is there avenues for justice? Is there an environment where the police and the justice system is not responding or is being biased and bigoted? And unfortunately, all of that is happening. So I will go back to what I was saying earlier. It's an enabling environment because perpetrators believe themselves to be protected. And all the exit polls are suggesting that this administration is going to return to India. And the expectation, therefore, would be that this time round there is reform, there is change, that this kind of philosophy that has at least fostered, and I'm sure your panelists will agree that it has fostered an unpleasant and really divided society in India, one that is not fitting in with this claim of all Indian religions live together, because that, of course, is the India that would be wonderful. But that's not what's happening right now. So therefore, the new administration has to, whichever ideology wins, has to make sure that that does change.
Okay, no division on this panel. I mean, I've got a second hand up there from Gaurang. I mean, so courteous, everybody here. But I'm going to have to ask you to keep it the way it is for the moment and go to Nikita, because you wanted to say something about 5 minutes ago, and I'm sorry, I moved the discussion around a bit.
That's okay. I just wanted to go back to your idea about where is this coming from. And, we're really talking about different ideas of India. And that is quite understandable, given that we're talking about the seventh largest country in the world in terms of geography, the second largest in terms of population, 1.3 billion people. So it's very hard to think of a homogeneous India. And there are multiple ideas. One is the post-partition, post-independent India idea, where we had bloody riots, we had one of the largest forced migrations in the world with partition, and you had the formation of Pakistan on the basis of religion, and India, which remained secular and had multiple religions within it.
So what you're saying
idea.
is division is to be expected.
Yes, but where the government takes us and what signals the people in power give us are crucial. So for a very long time, secularism was an ideal that India worked towards. There were also riots in previous governments' times in the 1960s, 80s, 90s. There's no denying that. There has been religious tension. But what is happening now is you have people in power giving very clear signals. For instance, one of the members of parliament, who's a contender right now, has gone on record during a rally saying this election is about a religious war.
Okay, let's give Gaurang the chance to respond to that.
And Hindus win. So it's the signals coming from the top that are really crucial and very important for the idea of India.
Nikita, I know you waited very patiently, but I want to keep this moving around. And Gaurang, the wrong signals are coming out. Love thy neighbour, you know that expression. Well, it appears a lot of people think the BJP doesn't.
Well, there are two things. What Ms. Ganguly had just spoken, because she made a very sweeping statement to the extent that it is not only the political party, but it also pertains to the judiciary or the investigating agency, which would mean the administration. And, so all the branches, from the judiciary to the executive to the legislature, all three have been colored in the same way, where there's sense of negativity and none of them are really functioning. Now, I want to ask a question to this panel that suppose the Supreme Court passes a judgment whereby national anthem needs to be played before every movie in a cinema theater. What do you call it? Nationalism? Divide? What do you call it?
I don't know. Let's throw that one out there. No. You've asked them a question. Let's get an answer.
I don't think that's a valid way of.
It's not a demonstration of national pride or division, is it? Because we gave it up in this country probably about 40 years ago.
Forcing people to sing the national anthem.
I mean,
people want to sing the national anthem, and they will do so, but coercively asking people to prove their nationalism before they watch a movie.
How people think about it.
Liberal democracy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
Let's move on from that one, because that is just one example. I get what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I do
Gaurang.
too. So therefore, I think because we're talking about minority rights here, but on nationalism shouldn't be on test. You said the MP that we were talking about, Mr. Jayant Sinha, returned and is a great Indian to have returned to India. I mean, there are millions and millions of Indians who love their country and are working towards it. Almost all of us are. There is nothing. It should not be one person being congratulated. You are, Gaurang, so am I, so is Nikita, so is Amar. I mean, this is what Indians do. They love their country. They don't have to be put on test.
Yeah, so we shouldn't perhaps call this nationalism.
Yes. So, and then let us go back to
It's increasing divisiveness, isn't it?
Yes, it's not. Stop testing it. And don't test it by whether I want to say Vande Mataram or whether I want to sing the national anthem. I mean, that's silly.
So do you think we should, or India could go towards enshrining the rights of different religions, people, creeds, castes, whatever, more forcefully in law, legal reforms?
Well, I think the Constitution is a pretty strong document, David, and It's whether the political establishment wants to ignore it or uphold it. I think that's really the situation we're in at the moment. The judiciary is under some pressure at a lower court level.
How independent is the judiciary?
Well, the
Or does it
Supreme Court
depend
has.
where you are?
Well, I'll put it like this: the Supreme Court is still very much paramount and, has its autonomy. But then at the same time, judges are coming out, giving press conferences, saying, "Well, we think we might be under threat from political."
We the judiciary.
We the judiciary,
Yeah.
right, from political interference. So that in itself says something. That's it's not me saying that; it's the judiciary saying that themselves. So you need to appreciate, I think, that this is a tug of war. It's an ideological tug of war, and it will continue. And that's on nationalism, but it's also on democratic values.
Yeah, and Gaurang, you work in the courts. I'm going to ask you a question rather than have to listen to one of your other points. Well made though they are, we don't have very much time left. Do you think it's the right time now to look at legal reforms that would at least make it appear that the judiciary was entirely independent and above all of this?
I'm totally with you to the extent that we do need to have laws which would take care of any sort of hate crime. I remember when I used to live in the United States, at the time 9/11 took place, and then we immediately had a legislation in place which would take care of it. So I think India also needs legislation which actually takes care of these kind of crimes, because we just have the Indian Penal Code under which people are actually tried. So I think it's time for a legislation to be in place which actually deals with any kind of, a mob lynching, hate crime.
Yeah, because hate crime sounds like you're saying something nasty to somebody, whereas in fact Amnesty is saying that hate crimes in this case include rape, murder, assault, lynching people for slaughtering cows, perhaps mistakenly, etc., etc.
Well,
We're talking about very serious crimes here, aren't
Yes,
we?
we are.
And he says we need new laws. You think that?
I think laws are great, and India actually has some very, very good legislation on a number of issues. I think enforcement is a problem. I also think that enforcement has often been selective. So while I think every Indian has the right to run for election and office, as has happened in this time, I do find it extraordinary that one person who has preached hate on her campaign trail is running for office for a particular party, while a bunch of activists are in jail, accused of sedition, of waging war, all kinds of serious allegations.
Is this a
because they
conspiracy,
are
or is it just sort of
leftists.
one of those things that happens in a country with so many people and so many different cultures and so many different
Yes,
departments running different things?
Well, David, I am completely of the view that India has always been noisy and should remain so. The problem really is when the state decides to shut one lot down over the other. When one lot is accused of sedition, another lot is uplifted and told, oh, well, it's freedom of speech. Now, that is a problem. For me, everyone has freedom of speech as long as it's not inciting.
So we're coming towards the end. Amar and Nikita, just to bring this to an end. Nikita, you first. Do you agree that there is a conspiracy to shut people up, perhaps, or are we just seeing the results of a disparate nation fretting amongst itself in a way like most families do?
There is definitely an attempt to shut people up, not just in this generation, people like us sitting here in the studio or away from it, but there is a concerted attempt to terrorize and shut up younger generations. So people have done research. For instance, someone called Nazia Iram, who wrote a book for Delhi called Mothering a Muslim, where she shows clearly how Muslim children aged 8, 6, 5 have notes written on their desk saying, you are a terrorist, you don't belong here.
Okay,
So,
so I'm sorry to cut you short. We are time limited, and I have to go to Amar. As somebody who's studied the way India has changed over the last, 130, 120 years or so, is it time to row back a little bit?
I think so.
And is it possible?
Without sounding too reductionist, though I may well do in the process, India has to not become a Hindu Pakistan. It's as simple as that. And when the Prime Minister accuses his opponent of going to a constituency where the minority are in the majority, he's running away to a constituency in which Christians and Muslims make for the majority, that in itself sets the wrong tone for a secular liberal democracy. This is an ideological fight, and it will continue. I don't think Modi's victory in this election necessarily means that question is settled. It's been up in the air for 90 years, David, and it will continue to be up in the air.
Do you think he's going to win with an increased majority? In other words, a mandate to continue with what some see as policies that persecute minorities?
The exit polls suggest that he will, but I wouldn't be surprised if he comes back with a majority. His alliance may come back with a majority, but he might be slightly more constrained and having to listen to allies who don't necessarily agree with all his views.
Listen, Gaurang, I would love to be able to give you another chance to say something, but we can talk about this off air. We can talk about this on many occasions, but I'm afraid the programme has come to an end. Thank you very, very much indeed. Each and every one of you. A Hindu Pakistan. Now, that is a very interesting phrase. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for watching. So, a victory predicted once again for Narendra Modi. Is nationalism the right term for it? Or is it just a massive country with a mass of opinions, with the minority perhaps unfairly being prosecuted and persecuted? From me, David Foster, thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.